Hi, everyone. Mrs. Thorson again. We're moving on to chapter 2. And with this chapter, we're going to be learning a lot about U.S. history. Basically, we're learning about how our government was formed inside of U.S. history and why we became a country and what we did afterwards. So if you remember this from U.S. history last year, you've seen Hamilton, you probably will understand a lot of this. This will be a refresher for you. Make sure you have your notes out. If you need to pause the video, that's fine, but have your notes so that you can follow along better and take notes if you want to. All right. So we were a colony of England in the 1600s, in the 1700s, and we were a lot like them. We actually took a lot of their ideas when we became our own country. We liked the idea of limited government. They had that because their monarch was not absolute. And we like the idea of a republic or a representative government where we elect people that will be representatives for us rather than everybody voting on everything. So our revolution was actually nicknamed or dubbed the Conservative Revolution because conservative means you don't change much. We really didn't. When you see the French Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a huge 180 change. Here we're like, nah, we'll just tweak here and there. We just want to be by ourselves. We're sick of getting taxed by them. So here's an example of how we're like England, where the idea of limited government comes from. So in the Magna Carta, this was in 1215, it was signed by King John. If you've ever seen any of the Robin Hood movies, the Prince John that was the villain in any of those movies, he was a real life person and later became king after his brother Richard had passed. They didn't like him. He was a jerk in real life too, just like you see in the movies. And they said, you need to sign this. The nobles said this. You need to sign this because we are sick of you having all the power. So he gave them some of the power back. And what does that sound like? Limited government or representative government when they said the monarch can't have all the power? And of course, your answer should be limited government. They limited the power the monarch can have. Fun fact, King John, when he signed it and he put an X on it, he didn't know how to write or read. So that's why he signed it like that. He had no idea how to do that. That's a little scary, thinking about our leader of a country not knowing how to read or write. That would just be a little frightening. Now, about, 400 and some years later, they signed the English Bill of Rights. So this was when William and Mary were king and queen, and this gave them powers to the parliament, where the parliament, which is like our version of Congress at the national level, they could have some power too, and they would be making it more of a republic. This is similar to a representative government. This is where they have representatives representing different parts of the country for the sake of the people. So we like those ideas. We took those ideas. It was great. But, obviously we had a beef with England, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We also really like the ideas of a philosopher named John Locke. John Locke wasn't a king. He wasn't a member of government. He just wrote books about how government should be. And he said, we are all born in what's known as a state of nature, where if there was, if we're all just born and nothing else exists, that's just it. There's no government to rule us. There's no laws to follow, anything like that. But every single person, no matter who you are born with what's known as natural rights. Whether you are the poorest person or the richest person in the country, every single person has 3 natural rights. You have the right to life, liberty, and property. Life meaning not dying, not having someone take that from you. Liberty meaning your freedoms, your freedom of speech, your right to privacy, that kind of stuff. And your right to property, private property. You can't just have your stuff stolen from you. Well, when we're in that state of nature, there's no laws or consequences to protect those things. And we as human beings want those things protected. We want laws that say you can't murder. We want laws that say you can't steal my stuff. You can't just knock on my door and say, I'm going to live here now. This is my house because I just feel like it. No, we want our private property protected. We want our freedoms protected. We want to be able to say whatever we want. We want to have the right to privacy without people taking it away from us. So we enter into what John Locke calls a social contract. And what that is we decide that we create a government, we the people, and with that we say, hey, government, can you please protect our life, liberty, and property? And we'll follow your laws. A contract is just an agreement between two people. So the government has the right to rule and to enforce those rules. But in return, we're protected. We follow those rules, but they protect us. And that's the deal of the social contract. But here's the kicker. John Locke said, if your government's bad, if you don't like the government and you think that they're being tyrannical or despots or just nasty, bye-bye. You can leave them and you can break that contract. And that really influenced our founding fathers. So they use those ideas for when we get to the American Revolution. So why in the world did we get mad at England? We were whining about taxes. Oh, everybody whines about taxes. I don't want to pay taxes. Well, we were doing the same thing. It's not any different. History is repeating itself. So they got into the French and Indian War. The French and Indians fought the British over North America and who could control it, and the British won. French pretty much always lose. I don't know if you know this about the French, but they won like one war by themselves and they lose everything else. So that makes history easier. So fun fact, if you're ever quizzed about the French and what wars they win, just say none and you'll probably be right. But I digress. So the French lost this war, obviously. And when they lost, England took over control of North America pretty much. And it was expensive. Wars are very expensive, very, very expensive. And they needed to pay for it. And they're like, well, how are we going to pay for this war? And they're like, I know. That's my terrible British accent. I know. We'll tax the colonists because we did this for them. And so they started taxing the colonists. And the colonists literally, they got on their phone. They're like, England, can we at least like have like someone in parliament to have a say over these? And England's like, no, we've got your best interests at heart. Love you, bye, cheerio. And they hung up, and the colonists were mad because they were getting taxed, yet they had no one in Parliament over in England to have a say in this. So that's where the no taxation without representation slogan came from. They had no representation. They got really angry. So the first big tax was known as the Stamp Act tax. And people were upset about this because it was a direct tax. And they'd never really experienced that before. And I'll give you an example of what this is, because there's direct and indirect taxes. So an indirect tax is like what you see at the gas station. So when you go and fill up your car, let's say it's $2 a gallon, you fill up 10 gallons, let's do some math, $20. Do you have to go in and pay extra taxes? No, the taxes are rolled into the price. That's an indirect tax. A direct tax is when you go to McDonald's and you're like, oh my gosh, I want a McDonald's Diet Coke, which by the way is the best pop ever. And you go and you're like, dollar menu, I'll get a large one. And you go to the window and you hand them your dollar and they're like, no, that's $1.08. And you're like, this isn't the $1.08 menu, it's the dollar menu. This is garbage. And that's known as a direct tax. Well, that's what the Stamp Act tax was. It was a direct tax on legal documents, pamphlets, newspapers. So you go buy your quarter newspaper, but you're really paying 30 cents. You're like, this is garbage. So the colonists were super upset. They started boycotting the goods and complaining. So here's what Britain did. They said, all right, I'm sorry. I'm going to repeal that, but we're putting in this new act called the Declaratory Act, which basically says we'll get rid of the Stamp Act, but any act we do from now on, you have to follow without complaint. Okay, bye. And we're like, yay, wait, what? Whoa. So things got bad for a while, and then they kind of died down, but then people got really mad when they started to be forced to drink a certain type of tea with the Tea Act. And the Tea Act was just, there was a British tea company that was like practically going bankrupt, so they forced the colonists to only buy that tea. It'd be like if you were a Coca-Cola fan, and all of a sudden the government just told you, no, you can only drink Pepsi because we need to make sure they're making money. That's what the Tea Act was. So the citizens got angry. They started, tossing the tea into the Boston Harbor, and nobody likes England and everybody's mad. So here's what we do. So we try, and actually this first one was during the French and Indian War, we try to unite. And we tried this with the Albany Plan of Union. If you ever see that like broken up snake that's all cut up and it says join or die, that was from the Albany Plan of Union, where Ben Franklin's like, why don't we join together so we can like talk and make sure we're united in this French and Indian War? And no one really listened. But then when people started getting mad about their tea and mad about the taxes and mad about having to house soldiers in their homes and everything like that, that's when we start seeing people unite in the country. So we see that with the First Continental Congress. Now that was like our first kind of like pseudo form of government. We're not a country yet. It's in 1774, but the colonies joined together. And the number one thing you need to remember with the First Continental Congress, they did an embargo or boycotted British goods. And I'm telling you, Bill Clinton said it best. It's the economy, stupid. And what that basically means is everything, if you want to control anything, or if you want to have any type of political clout, mess with the economy. And when we mess with the British economy, they pulled out of the acts for a little bit, and they basically said, okay, sorry, we'll stop doing that. But then they got back doing it, and we got mad. So we ended up kind of starting a little fight with them known as Lexington and Concord, where we were kind of shooting at British soldiers just a little bit. They were shooting back. We don't even know who shot first. And it was known as the shot heard around the world because this is what led to the Revolutionary War, not the actual independence of America. Not yet. It led to the war because this is in 1775. So once we're like, oh, geez, we've got to start a war, we start getting a central government together. So the Second Continental Congress was our wartime government. John Hancock is president. George Washington is in charge of the troops. And we officially declared war against England. So if you've ever seen Hamilton and you see King George singing about his love for his country, and he's like, and if push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. That's because we tried to apologize to them with the Olive Branch petition. We're like, sorry for fighting. Can't we just be friends? And he sent 20,000 troops as a response to remind us of his love. So we're fighting them. It's still 1775. We're moving on to 1776. It's about January. This guy by the name of Thomas Paine, or T-Paine as I call him, comes out with this pamphlet, super popular, called Common Sense. And it's basically like, here's why King George III is the worst, the absolute worst, and we should declare independence. And Sam Adams, who's in charge of the Sons of Liberty, I almost said Sons of Anarchy, wrong group. He's like, why don't we just declare independence? Aren't we already independent? We're fighting these guys. We're against them. So that leads to our Declaration of Independence, which is the greatest breakup letter of all time. Basically, it's like, dear England, you're the worst. You treat us like garbage. I'm breaking up with you. And here's all the reasons why you're the worst. And now that I'm a single lady, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And you're going to see that when you read the Declaration of Independence for your assignment. So here's the 5 W's of it. So who wrote it? Thomas Jefferson. What is it? It's really quite simple. They make it very easy for us. It's the time we declared our independence from England. Duh, that makes it very simple. It was written in Philadelphia. This is where the birth of our country comes from, July 4, 1776. That's why we have the 4th of July, because that's when we officially declare our independence. It's known as Independence Day. And why do we do it? Because England's the worst. They keep taxing us. We don't have representation. They treat us like garbage. And we were done. We wanted to just break away. I'm breaking up with you. You do you. Let me fly. So that's it for notes today. I want you to follow along and do the Declaration of Independence worksheet. You can read it, but as you will see, there's also a video of celebrities reading it if you want to listen to it being read out loud too. Or you can listen to my man JFK reading it out loud, which is absolutely fabulous too. That's your choice. I will see you guys later.